Thank you, Izzy. That was beautiful. Such a lovely song. It's hard to follow that, isn't it? Why do I have to speak after that emotional kind of section? But anyway, how many times this week have you had a decision to make and you just wished or hoped that someone else would make that decision for you? Now, in kind of getting ready for today, I thought I'd just give you a bit of an insight into some of the decisions that I've had to make this week that I just wish someone would have told me what the right thing to do was. Started with this. What route into Ipswich should I take at 8 o'clock in the morning to get me to work as quick as I can and to avoid the most traffic? Am I being too soft in this conversation with my colleague? Do I need to be a little bit firmer? How do I get this child who is deliberately disobeying me to do what I want them to do? How many times can I reheat a cup of tea? Probably some of those things Google or ChatGPT could have answered for me, and some of them probably a little bit insignificant. But have you had any of the bigger questions to answer, the bigger decisions? Should I take that job? Should I move? Should I enter into that relationship? Should I end that relationship? Should I spend that money or should I save that money? The kind of decision where you think, if I get this wrong, this could affect the next 5 years, 10 years, the rest of my life potentially. Any of you been there? And maybe you've prayed about it. Maybe you've asked God for help. Maybe you've even said something to God like, God, I will do anything if you just tell me what it is I have to do. And then nothing. Absolute silence. You don't hear any voice from heaven. You don't get some divine inspiration. There's no angel. So you start looking for your own signs. You say, God, if this is your will, then let all the traffic lights turn green on my way to work this morning. If she texts me before 3 p.m, then surely it's meant to be, right? And if you're really desperate, what some of us have done is opened up the Bible, which isn't a bad thing to do, but just picked a random verse by chance, hoping that's going to answer your big dilemma for you. It doesn't always work out that great. I'm going to let you into a little secret that I hadn't told anyone until this morning. When I was 17, 18 years old, there was a guy. Now, when you're a teenage girl, there's often a guy, but this was the guy. I was completely besotted with this boy, and he was the one. I just needed him to realise that, and I needed God to confirm that for me as well. So I did what any good Christian girl does. I said, you know what, God, I'm going to leave it up to you. God, if this is meant to be, you need to show me this is how it's meant to be. But I didn't just leave it there, because in that kind of waiting period, I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a few deals with God. So I would say things like, God, if I see him today driving his car, then it's meant to be. Or if he offers me a lift home from church on Sunday, then he surely likes me too, right? But that wasn't all. I didn't just leave it there, because God wasn't giving me the right answer that I wanted. And so I would almost manipulate things to get the answer I wanted, to get the right outcome. So in saying, God, if I see him today in his car, what I would do is I would drive by the end of his road at about the right time he'd come home from work, thinking, then I've done it, it's meant to be. And I do realise that's a little bit stalkerish behaviour. I don't do it anymore, so it's all good. But I would try and get God to confirm the thing that I really wanted in my heart. Maybe I'm on my own there, and maybe I'm just a bit of a weirdo. But I'm sure you'd all love me to say, do you know what? It all worked out great. We fell in love, got married, lived happily ever after. Do you know what? I never even told him I fancied him. So it didn't work out like that. But do you know what? Both he and I are very happily married, not to each other, but it's all worked out well for both of us. I think a lot of us, we do this, maybe to not quite that level, but we want God to confirm that our own desires align with his will for our life. And that's what we spend a lot of our thinking time, a lot of our worrying time doing. We treat God a little bit like Google Maps. We want to type in a destination and we want God to show us exactly the route to take. Turn-by-turn directions. Turn left in 200 metres. When it's safe to do it, turn around. But God doesn't often work like that. Most of the time, God doesn't give us a map. He gives us something else. I think he sometimes gives us just the one next step, or two, maybe. A light for a small part of the path ahead. And this morning, we're going to talk about something that's really important. If you've been here over the last few weeks, we are in the middle of this series, God Just Tell Me, where we've been looking at that. How do we understand God's will for our life? You can catch up. If you've missed it, you can catch up online at any point. But I'm just going to recap the last few weeks for us if you haven't been here. In week 1, Steve was here and he talked to us about the 4 different types of God's will. He talked about these: God's sovereign will, which is really how God ultimately accomplishes everything he wants to in the world. God's moral will, how he calls you and I to live. God's permissive will, what he allows in a broken world because he gave us free choice. And then lastly, God's personal will, how he maybe guides us individually in our everyday decisions. And we said something really important on that week 1, that knowing God's will starts with knowing God's heart. Last week, Emily continued that, and she said something else super important, saying God's will is often more about a who than a do. In other words, you and I might want a plan for the future, but Jesus wants a relationship today. We want the map, but God says, just walk with me. God says that who we are and who we are becoming is far more important than what we do. And today, we're going to explore another element of this whole God's will conundrum, and it's this. What do you do when God's will is unclear? When it isn't clear, what do we do? Now, if you would call yourself a follower of Jesus, we will often talk about following God's will and how we're to live in God's will. But we talk much less about those moments when it is unclear, when we're not actually sure what God's will is. And it's not because we don't care about that or that we're rebellious of any sort. It's because sometimes it genuinely isn't obvious. We might pray for guidance, we might look for signs, we read the Bible, and instead of any clarity, we get silence. So what do we do then? What do we do when we sincerely want to follow God's will for our life, but it's not clear? See, God doesn't always reveal to us, either through a whisper from heaven or maybe shouting through a megaphone. He doesn't always reveal to us the obvious answer. Often, it's revealed through wisdom here on earth. See, God's will isn't always some magical open door that flings open in front of us for us, or a closed door that feels obvious. It's not always a big spiritual calling on our life. Sometimes it's a real simple, practical choice. And today I want us all to discover how God actually guides people, especially when the answer is unclear. And to help us do that, we're going to look in the Bible at a guy called Paul. Now, if you're new to church, if you're not familiar with the Bible, don't worry. Paul is kind of a big deal in Christianity. And before becoming a Christian, before becoming a follower of Jesus, he used to persecute Christians. And then he encountered Jesus, his life got turned upside down, and he became one of the greatest followers of Jesus in all of history. He went on to plant churches across the Roman Empire. He wrote 13 of the books that we find in the Bible. He performed miracles, and he went on and preached about Jesus to many, many people across loads of different countries. This guy, Paul, was a serious follower of Jesus. And yes, he had some supernatural encounters. He met Jesus on a road who just appeared to him after Jesus' death. He was blinded, and then he was healed, and he decided to follow Jesus. It was all really crazy. Look back in the Bible if you want to learn more about that story. Another time, Jesus appeared to him in prison and tells him that he's going to go and preach in Rome. Yet another time, Paul is in a massive storm at sea, and this angel appears saying that God's going to save him and save everyone on board. Quite big, dramatic moments. Moments when God reveals himself with complete certainty. But here's the interesting thing. That wasn't always the case. Those weren't the norm for Paul. Most of the time, I think God led Paul through very ordinary moments in ways that actually look a lot like how God leads you and I today. I think some of the things that sometimes trip us up when we read the Bible is we see these amazing miracles and amazing stories of how God has revealed himself to people, and we can end up feeling a little bit disappointed. Disappointed because we don't see that in our own lives day to day. We're almost a little bit envious of it, saying, God doesn't speak to me like that. I don't get that experience. But what we're going to see today is actually God does speak in the Bible in very normal, ordinary ways as well. When Paul was trying to figure out what to do next, again and again, we see God guiding him in 4 really simple ways. And it's these 4 ways: through open doors, through closed doors, through frustrated plans, and everyday choices. First up, we see God guiding Paul through open doors. During one of Paul's trips to see a church, he wrote this: "But I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me." I love how practical Paul is here. See, he doesn't say, "I had a dream, an angel appeared to me, I had this vision, God spoke audibly." He said, a great door opened, really simply. Not dramatic, not mystical, not super spiritual, just clear. And he recognised that God's hand was in that. You know, many of us may have experienced things like that in our own lives. Maybe for you, it's a job that came out of nowhere. Maybe someone's invited you to do something, maybe volunteer here around church. And you thought, you know what, that kind of works, I can do that. A conversation you've had that you think, do you know what, this feels like the next best thing for me. For me, that was certainly true last year. I was very happy here on the staff team at the Forge, and I wasn't looking for a new job. I wasn't scrolling job sites. I wasn't searching for a new opportunity. I wasn't necessarily looking to make a big change in my life. But then, unexpectedly, a door opened, and I had the sense, do you know what, I think God might be in this. You know, I prayed about it, I spoke to a few close friends, and I didn't get that massive confirmation from God that this is the thing for you, this is the job that you need to go and do. Sometimes God guides us in a simple, really ordinary way. A door just opens, and we have the freedom to step through into it. But there's a part of it that we don't always like. Paul said, a great door has opened, and there are many who oppose me. In other words, an open door doesn't always mean an easy path. Most of us, if we're honest, we think if this is God's will, then surely everything's going to be plain sailing from here on in. It will go smooth and comfortable, it will be peaceful, and it is just right because that is what God has ordained for me. But Paul shows us something different. Sometimes the bigger the opportunity, the greater the opposition. So if there's something right now in your life that you're facing, and you're facing a little bit of resistance with it, maybe you're not sure if you're in the right job or in the right relationship. Maybe you've got a big decision to make. The Bible tells us, Paul tells us, that it isn't always going to be easy. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we've made a mistake. It doesn't mean that we've misheard God or we've taken a wrong turn. We often jump to those conclusions, don't we, when difficulties come, when things don't quite go right. We question it, saying, do you know what, I got this wrong. Maybe this wasn't what God wanted for me after all. We can forget that obedience can lead into storms just as much as it can into calm waters. Obedience can lead into storms just as much as it can calm waters. Think of the disciples. There was a moment that's recorded in the Bible where Jesus told them to get into a boat. And they got into a boat, sailed across the lake, and the first thing they do is go straight into a storm. They hadn't misheard Jesus. They hadn't got it wrong. They were exactly where he asked them to be, where the resistance came. So instead of seeing trouble as maybe a sign that we've got it wrong and we've misheard God, maybe it's confirmation that we're right in the center of what God is doing. We're right where God needs us to be in that moment. It's a confirmation. You're standing exactly where you were supposed to be standing. And when things get tough, when we say, did I mishear it? Did I rush ahead? The very pushback to your experience is because what you're doing has spiritual significance. God has invited into something, and there will be people who oppose you. That resistance isn't random. It's not pointless. It's not punishment. It's proof that the door you walked through was very real. And open doors and opposition often come as a pair. but God is in both of those things. The second way I think Paul heard God's will in his life was through closed doors. In Acts, we read this: the Holy Spirit prevented them from preaching in the province of Asia, and again, the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them to go into Bithynia. Twice, not once, twice, Paul and his friend Silas were blocked. And it's important to notice what they were trying to do. See, Paul and Silas, they weren't chasing comfort. They weren't doing something off of their own kind of back and their own will and doing something selfish. They weren't running from responsibility. What they were trying to do was something good. They were trying to go somewhere to preach about Jesus and to share the good news to others. It was a good thing to do, and their motives was pure. And still, God said no. Here's an important lesson that maybe some of us need to grasp today. God's no is still direction. Sometimes God guides us not by opening a door, but by gently, or maybe not so gently, by slamming a door closed. But we don't like that often, do we? We don't like hearing no, especially from God. Think about parenting. If a child confidently walks into you and says, do you know what, I'm going to make my own breakfast this morning, and you go into the kitchen and you see them with a cereal box in one hand and the dog bowl in the other, you're more likely to be like, no, just stop, wait. Because as parents, we have the hindsight to know that that's going to end in disaster. You know that's going to end up with needing a mop and maybe a sick child and a sick dog. So we say no. God does the same for us. We think maybe we're heading somewhere wonderful, doing something good, and sometimes we are. But God sees the whole picture. God steps in and maybe closes that door. Looking back, sometimes those no's, they're not a punishment, they're not a failure, they were guidance. God was closing wrong doors so that other doors could maybe open, so you could walk towards the right yes. And maybe you know exactly what that feels like. You thought that job is the one, and the door was closed. You thought that relationship is the one, and it got slammed in your face and broke your heart. You thought this plan is definitely God's will, but that door was firmly locked shut. And in those moments, you may have questions that start arising. Did I miss it? Is God disappointed in me? Did I mess something up? Maybe that no, though, isn't rejection. Maybe it was protection. Maybe God was steering you away from something that you just couldn't see, something that would have drained you, that would have hurt you, that might have limited you. Maybe he think better. Some of you have lived this, I know. At some point in your life, you were convinced that either someone or something was the one that was the right thing. And God has slammed that door so hard in your face, it rattled your bones and it's broken your heart. And it even makes you sad now when you look back and reflect on it. But maybe you can learn to look back at it and think, thank God that was a no. Because where I'm standing right now, the yeses that I've been able to do since then is where God needs me to be. See, closed doors doesn't mean that God has stopped leading us. Closed doors mean God is actively leading you, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Sometimes God closes those doors so he can lead us into the right place, the right people, the right purpose. Thirdly, Paul knew God's guidance through frustrated plans. One of the fascinating things about Paul's letters is how often he says things like, perhaps I'll come visit you. Maybe I'll stay the winter. He says, if the Lord permits. Paul wasn't vague because he lacked direction. He was making plans. He just held those plans loosely. He wasn't afraid to dream and to prepare or take steps forward, but he also knew that he wasn't in control of every single detail of the journey. And I think often that's what can surprise us. He didn't panic when plans changed. He wasn't anxious about it. He didn't spiral when things suddenly took a turn. He understood that uncertainty didn't mean God was absent. Paul writes something really powerful. He writes this. He put, we walk by faith, not by sight. Paul didn't need absolute certainty to be able to live with absolute trust. Some of us, you and I, sometimes we need a 5-year plan. We need a spreadsheet and a Gantt chart. We need to know exactly what is happening and when it is happening. But Paul was comfortable enough to say, perhaps, maybe, if God allows. That is someone who understands what true faith actually looks like. You don't need to see the whole map before we start walking. And the truth is, God doesn't give us the whole map anyway. He gives us the next step. Psalm 119 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. A lamp doesn't light the whole journey ahead, doesn't show you what's going to come up 10 miles down the road or what's at the final destination. That's how God leads, often with a light on the next 2 steps, the next 100 yards. And it can be frustrating because we want the schedule, we want the clarity. But God doesn't always give it to us like that. God is more interested in forming our trust and our faith than in satisfying our own desires for control. Sometimes the best and the most spiritual thing you can do is just to take one next step, even when you don't know what step 10 looks like. Maybe you're someone who's lived like that. You've planned a whole year ahead and it's not turned out how you wanted. You set your heart on something and it didn't come to fruition. Frustrated plans doesn't mean that God has forgotten you. Frustrated plans often mean God is guiding you. He's redirecting. He's preparing. He's shaping you, even when it feels confusing in the moment. Because the goal isn't always to have perfect plans. The goal is a trusting heart to follow Jesus wherever he may lead us to. The fourth way that God guided Paul was through everyday choices. And this might actually be the most surprising. Sometimes Paul just made an everyday choice for himself. In one letter, he writes, I have decided to stay here for the winter. In another place, he said, we decided to stay. And again, says, let us go back and see how the churches are doing. No angel showing up, no prophet, no writing on the wall, no lightning bolt from heaven, just a decision. Why? Sorry. It's God. Because Paul understood something incredibly freeing. Paul understood that when you're living within the moral will of God, when you're following Jesus, when you honour him with your choices and live a holy life, sometimes God simply gives you the freedom to choose. And that can be scary. What if I pick the wrong choice? What if I miss God's perfect will? What if I miss everything up? But the Bible reminds us again and again that God is not fragile. His plan is not fragile. Our mistakes don't break his sovereignty over our life. The Bible says God works everything together according to his plan, which means that even if we don't get it perfect, even if we do mess it up, God is still perfectly capable of guiding us. Sometimes God opens a door. Sometimes God closes a door. Sometimes plans get frustrated. And sometimes God gives us the keys and says, you can make the decision yourself. You choose, you pick, you decide. I'm with you in it, he says to us. And that's what part of growing spiritually is about if we're a follower of Jesus. You know, as a parent, when you've got a young child, you do a lot for them. You choose what they eat, you choose what they wear, you choose when they go to bed. But as your children get older, you give them more freedom. Not because you're less interested or less involved or that you care less or love them any less, but because it's the right thing to do. Because you want them to learn responsibility. You want them to grow in wisdom and character and maturity. And God does the same with us. He trusts us with real choices. He trusts us with responsibility. He trusts you enough to let you decide what you want to do. And then he walks with us through it, through the consequences, through the blessings, and all the opportunities that may follow. And I think for some of us, that's the freedom that we need to hear today. You don't have to be paralyzed by fear in getting it wrong. I think some of us can stay stagnant because we're too afraid to make a decision, too afraid we're going to get it wrong and mess up. And I'm sure this is something I've said from stage before, but I think sometimes God is shouting at us, please just do something. Stop asking me all the time what it is you should be doing in X, Y, and Z. Just take a step and make a decision. I don't think he's going to get cross at us if we make a decision here and now and again. If we're walking with God, you can make a choice, even a normal everyday one, and trust that he is big enough and great enough that he will guide us through it. So this is the big idea of this morning. If you want a map, God's not going to necessarily give it to us. He'll give us a lamp. We might want certainty, but Jesus calls us to faith. We might want a plan, but God gives us a person. He gives us Jesus. And when we walk with Jesus step by step along a journey, something beautiful happens because we begin to trust that same God in the same way that Paul learned to trust God, trusting that he will guide us and steer us the way we should go. The Bible gives us this real beautiful promise. It says this in Psalm 32, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Think about that image for a moment. God's loving eye is on you. He sees you. He cares. He's guiding. So when God opens a door, walk through it. When he closes a door, trust him. When plans get frustrated, keep going, keep walking. And when you have a choice to make, choose with wisdom. Take that next step. You don't have to be certain to be faithful. You just have to be willing to take that next step with the one who is already there, who's walking beside you, who walks in front of you and around you the whole time. Let me pray. God, I thank you for that image that you gave us in your word, that your loving eye is on us. You are a God who loves. You love everything about us. No one could love us greater than you do. No one wants better for us than you. And God, you trust us. You trust us to make our own decisions. You trust us to be wise. And so, Lord, I thank you that sometimes you will guide us with dramatic insight. Sometimes there will be a still small voice telling us what to do. And other times when it's unclear, when you feel silent to us, sometimes we have to trust our own wisdom that you have given us, that we've only gained from walking close with you. So, Lord, as we strive to be like you, as we strive to walk with you, help us to take what we need this morning and to put that into practice. Maybe for some of us it's the next step we have to take, and we know, and we've just been putting it off because we've been waiting for some big confirmation. Maybe some of us need to be brave this morning in making that decision. For others, God has shown us in various ways what we're to do, but we don't like it. And maybe we need to accept there is a closed door. And as frustrating as that is, Lord, we live in faith because you know what is best. And your plans always work together for good. God, thank you that you can be trusted. Thank you that you're always good and always loving. Amen.